Are you a business owner stuck in fear, doubt, and worry about what the marketplace will look like in the future? Then this show is for you. Strap on your seatbelt and get ready to disrupt and innovate. Here's your host, Lisa Levy.
Today's guest is Dr. John Hillen, a powerhouse in strategic leadership with an extraordinary career spanning business, government, academia, and the military. He's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, CEO, board chairman, and award-winning professor. Dr. Hillen brings a rare combination of real-world leadership and academic insights. He teaches strategy and leadership at Duke and George Mason Universities and Hampton-Sydney College, and his work has been featured in Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. Whether you're a seasoned leader or an emerging one, get ready to think strategically, learn how to solve complex problems, and cultivate a mindset that will drive your organization forward. John, welcome to the conversation.
Great to be with you, Lisa. Thanks.
I am so excited to have this conversation with you today. The perspectives and the dimensions to your career and your experience are broad and vast, and I think that the impact that it makes for the audience is so important. Will you start us off with why what you're doing today is so important for leaders?
So today I'm teaching and writing about strategy for the most part, and especially in my newest book, The Strategy Dialogues. And other people told me why it was important, and I came to realize it was. It's because I'm a strategist, and now I teach strategy. People kept coming to me and saying, I'm told I need to think strategically. I'm told I need to act more strategically. And these would be people who would range from CEOs of pretty big enterprises on down through, aspiring new managers. And I said, okay, what's the problem? Because, I teach strategy, so therefore it must be natural to everybody. And they would say, nobody's ever told me what that means. And I actually cite a story in the book of a director on a big company board holding a rising executive accountable for not thinking strategically enough, and the director himself could not articulate what that meant. So it's something we're all throwing around as a word. Moreover, we're all throwing it around as an expectation for part of our executive competencies, and there's almost no training in it other than maybe the core strategy course you get, doing a business degree somewhere. So I set out to take this concept of strategy, especially business strategy, pull it down out of the clouds and put it into everybody's hands as an everyday, practical set of tools and exercises and frameworks that should be part of your everyday organizational life, not some secretive star chamber thing that happens at the offsite once a year with the top people in your enterprise.
So if I challenge back to what is the basic definition of strategy or thinking strategically, what does it mean?
Well, let me answer it in two parts, because strategy itself and thinking strategically are naturally related, but they're a little bit different. So strategy itself, it's sometimes easier to say what it's not, because this is what confuses people. It's not a goal. Goals are part of a strategy, but they're not a strategy in themselves. It's not a mission, although a mission informs a strategy. It's not a vision or a set of values. It's not even some modest improvement over last year's performance. Strategy is a complete game plan, a blueprint to move an organization from where it is now to a place of better advantage in the future. And that blueprint and that game plan tells people where we're going. That's where the goals and objectives come in. Yep. The scope of activities we're going to do or not do along the way. And that includes who's doing what, the sequence in which they happen, the dependencies between certain steps, how the different moves interconnect and build on one another. And then finally, why are we moving to this new place? You say it's going to provide sustainable advantage into the future. What does that mean? What does advantage mean for us? Why us? Why would somebody pick us over somebody else? And I think all strategists need to think competitively. So that's a strategy, the blueprint and the game plan to reposition an organization for more advantage in the future. When I look for the telltale signs of a strategic mind that can get their heads around this, and I'll use a Vegas term. What's a tell? What's a tell of somebody thinking strategically? They're thinking big picture, not the issues right in front of them. They're thinking long term and not just today's issues. Most executives are focused on task accomplishment,
Mm.
right? And yet, how do you think into the future? Strategists think in terms of systems. They're systems thinkers. They try to connect how things interact with each other in environment. Analysts are the opposite. Analysts break problems down. They use their left brain to break problems down. Strategists use their right brain to see how everything connects. Another giveaway for a strategic mindset is it generally challenges the status quo. There's some change or transformation involved. We're moving to a new place. We're moving to a better place. What does better mean? Well, let me explain it to you because it's better in the future. So now I'm tying concepts together. I'm doing all these things that are relative to one another, and I'm talking about this taking place in the future. And there's a kind of, I think, necessary optimism to the strategic mind in and around that explanation. So I think those are the pieces that start to come together for understanding both what a strategy is and then how a strategic mindset reflects that.
There's a lot in that, and we're going to play with lots of
book
those.
in that.
There's a book in that. There's a college curriculum in that. And they're all right. Those are all consumable ideas that you've just shared with the audience. But I want to pull on the first, was really the last thing you said, but the one I want to start with. There's statistics. There was research around successful and effective leaders. And one personality and behavioral trait that they all have in common is optimism. To actually be able to think strategically, to look into the future, to create that blueprint, we have to come at it with an optimistic mind, or it doesn't actually come together. Do you agree with that kind of that mindset, that that's a critical place for the beginning of that strategic journey?
Completely. And let me give you an example, Lisa, where you really see this. And I borrow this in the book from one of the great strategic thinkers of the time, a fellow named Roger Martin. Probably published 30 articles on strategy in Harvard Business Review, among many great books. And he very kindly endorsed the book because I think we think in a similar way about this. But he says, if you have a problem, and what organization doesn't have problems? When I was a CEO, public company CEO, I'd walk in, there were 100 new problems on my desk every day. And so everybody's got problems. So what if you reframe the problem as a set of possible actions to get to a different future? And then you simply ask, on all these possible actions, what would have to be true for this to work? That's a natural optimism to that. The usual method is you have a problem. You say, oh gosh, this product is declining in sales. Everybody involved in that product, get in the conference room. Then you load up for the circular firing squad and you try to figure out what's going wrong and who's doing what wrong and so on and so on. He says, what if you just say, what are possible changes for the future? We could add new features and sell it to the same customers. We could take the same old product and sell it to totally different customers, a new geography, a different market. We could divest it. Let's go call in the M&A team and divest it because it's not part of our greater plan and the portfolio we want to build going forward of products and services. Oh, let's talk about that greater plan and portfolio of products and services. We could merge with somebody else and allow their capabilities to merge with this and resurrect this product, and so on and so on. And you would chart out for all these possible courses of action, what would have to be true for this to take place? And at that point, having put an optimistic wrapper around an issue, a problem that needs to be solved in the company, your head's in a totally different place. And all you've done is recast the lens that you held up to your eye with which to view the exact same problem as more of a set of strategic options to a more positive future. So I think that's really good exercise. I tell companies and nonprofits and government agencies do that all the time, right? Take every one of your problems and just try it that way. So a different conversation emerges in the room, a more positive, more optimistic conversation.
It absolutely does. And one of the other things that I like to play with in that mindset, right? Problems, there's 100 new ones every day. Absolutely. But also when we look out at our workforce, there's also 100 new ideas. Right. And so, yes, and I love the model for turning the problems into what's possible, what's true. How do we make that part of a more positive future? But I also love the idea of, generating ideas, ideation, and building innovation from within. Because as you were going through, the product isn't performing, and if we're going to divest the product or the service, what is it that's replacing that, and how do we keep that moving through growth cycles for the business's long-term health? Because as we know, if there's just one thing and that one thing doesn't perform anymore, we're in dire straits. So I think that there's a really nice combination of how you're looking at problems as future opportunities for growth, but pairing that with the idea that there should always be fresh ideas coming in too.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things I do in the book, Lisa, is I try to give people a framework and a thought structure
Okay.
in which to organize exactly what you just said. So there's a lot of good ideas floating around. I make the point in the book and I say strategy needs new ideas, but at the end of the day, it's not a brilliant idea generation contest.
Mm-hmm.
It's a structured thought process to push your ideas through a set of frameworks that allow you to organize your thoughts and test the ideas. And I have stress tests in there for different strategies. If you go through that whole thing, go through the strategic thought process, the external environment, the internal competencies, the different moves available strategically to you because of it, whether they're based in, really complex innovation, whether based in simply dropping your prices or something like that, repositioning a different part of the market, the corporate strategy aspects of it, which may include, you alluded to thinking about your business as a portfolio of businesses. And they all have sort of different kind of strategies. Even going international, you consider all these things. And if at the end of all of that, the narrative makes sense, the positioning story makes sense, and the numbers make sense, and you're like, that was a good idea, right? But you don't want to get to that first. And so what I try to tell, especially younger enterprises, more entrepreneurial enterprises, who are always rich with ideas, and they have 900 different possible paths to the future. And I'm an investor as well. And I'm like, let's slow down, everybody. Let's just test. Let's go through the thought process. Do me a favor, commit to the process. They're basically the last words in the book. Commit to the process. And let's see what emerges at the end of it. Because a market opening is not necessarily good business. And a good business is not necessarily good business for you as an enterprise. And there's a systematic way to sort through all of it. And that's just the strategic thinking process.
And it really is. The topic is fun to play with. Ideas, right? They are the things that will solve the problems and all of these and drive new products and services to market. But you can't follow all 900, and you have to do the thought work, right? The first part of ideation for me is taking 900 and getting down to 10. Right. And of those 10, and we're doing this in real time in a room, right? This is not like time, money, effort. This is just prioritizing what's possible in a realistic period of time, and where would we want to invest actual time, actual money, and resources. And it's a thought exercise first, and everybody wants to go and play because the new technology, the widget, the whatever. But thinking is such an incredibly important thing that when you look at your audience members, your calendars every week, where's the block of time where you just think?
Yeah. Yeah, there are three things that with leaders I've found that constantly get pushed off their calendars, even when these leaders know they're perhaps the three most important things they could be spending their time on that'll change their future. One is setting aside the time to think strategically. So thinking about the big picture, thinking long term. And that gets pushed off the calendar because there's always a crisis or something to get done. Okay, so task accomplishment wins. If we go back to the old, Eisenhower matrix repopularized by Stephen Covey, the urgent beats out the important. So that's number one. The second thing is coaching and developing other leaders. People set aside time for it, and then it disappears off the calendar. And yet at the same time, if you develop other leaders, you can delegate things. You can fire your old self and hire your new self to create the enterprise you're not, as opposed to just run the enterprise you are. That's also thinking strategically. I'm creating myself as the boss of who we are in the future, not just running today's store. And the third thing really is getting outside of the office and building a strategic network. Other leaders, other thinkers in the community, competitors. I tell people, take your competitors to lunch. First of all, they'll spill the beans. They always do because they want to talk and you'll learn a lot. And second of all, you need to build a network because if you wait until you need a relationship, it's too late to form it. And those three things I've found with leaders really separates the great forward thinking strategic leaders from people who are just very competently running today's business. And yet those are the three things, because they don't seem as urgent, that often get pushed off the calendar.
Those are really good points for everybody listening because as you're going down the list, I know I'm guilty of it.
Who isn't?
Right. I think everybody is at some point and going, no, those things they're important, but they're not urgent. John, you have been in and out of so many different types of businesses. Will you share with us a story of something that you were building towards a strategic goal and it just went sideways, and how you and a team navigated through that, to get it back on track to get to where you wanted to be?
Sure. And, I've got a lot of these stories. I've made a lot of mistakes, so everybody gets to learn from mine in the books I've written. But there's one, and I have a chapter wrapped around it a little bit. But I was in a capital markets trading firm. I was the chief operating officer. This is basically an electronic stock market, and it was trying to democratize the stock markets over 20 years ago and make them cheaper, make them more transparent, make them more accessible for investors than the old school, New York Stock Exchange close. You literally cannot go down on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, right? You're not allowed. So we were trying to make the market virtually allowed for everybody. Everybody could be there and see everything in real time and have to pay almost nothing for the privilege. So it's a great inspiring mission. It did end up changing and lowering costs and democratizing the whole system. And we had this brilliant software program written by the founder that basically made it all possible. So we had a great business, we had a great strategy, and we had this inspiring mission. And we needed to figure out how to make money. you know? And then we got serious investors, people like Bain, people like TA Associates. And thankfully, the serious investors are also really smart. And they said, your strategy is fine, it's your business model that's the problem. Oh, what's a business model? Well, your business model is the engine underneath your strategy. What's your value proposition? How do you deliver it? How do you price for that? What's the cost structure underpinning the delivery of that value and the price system? What are the processes that do that? Who are the kinds of people, and how do all these things connect, and where can it change? So we changed our business model from a software as a service or software licensing type business model, both. We changed it to a transaction-based business model where we rebated some kinds of customers and charged other kinds of customers. Because what we found out is they didn't want the software, they wanted the use of the software to get to the stock market. And that's what they found useful, not having the actual software. So when we got out of our own heads and we realized what was the value proposition that our customers wanted from us, not what was the thing we wanted to produce and sell, then we were able to change the business model, and we ended up having a tremendously successful business as a fiscal enterprise, not just as a strategic enterprise.
That is a fantastic story that incorporates so many of the things we talk about on the show on a regular basis. As owners, as operators, as the founders of the companies, we love the thing. We love what it is that we're doing, and we forget to really understand what our customers actually value. And so making the shift, putting the customer at the center of your business universe, it changed the entire business model so that it was profitable and you experienced the type of growth you were looking for simply by understanding what the value was. And it wasn't necessarily the system, but the access to the stock market that it provided to the end users.
That's right. And you make a great point. We often, especially in the more entrepreneurial companies, can get obsessed with ourselves and our idea and the product or service that results from that. And you tend to think of the customer as a necessary inconvenience for me to get my product or service across them. There's a similar story with, there's a Swiss tool company, Hilti Tools, and they sold tools, big construction tools for big construction sites and big construction mills. And then along the way, they realized that their customer, the construction site, who needed to build something in order to get paid for it, they didn't want the tool, they wanted the use of the tool. And so they changed their whole business model to being sort of a fleet leasing kind of scheme. Rather than selling somebody a tool, where the point of sale was at the construction site between the construction manager and the Hilti salesperson. The point of sale for having a contract between huge construction companies and Hilti corporate was in the CFO's office, right? And then Hilti would always own the tools and maintain them and everything. And then the construction company got what they wanted, was the use of the tool while they're building something, and then they give it back. Well, that's one part of the story. But the other part is Hilti had to change everything. Their management information systems, their customer relationship management systems, the kinds of people they hired, the whole nature of their sales team. So everything changes when your business model shifts. Netflix has been a distribution company, a technology services provider, and now an entertainment company. And everything had to change and shift as they became three different kinds of companies, still kind of holding on to two bits of that. So I think probably, especially for newer organizations, the chapters I have in there and around business models is probably the most insightful part of thinking through the whole strategy calculus.
Yeah, and absolutely. And Netflix is that great example of a business that is changing, right? It is actively, it was initially a disruptor. Blockbuster passed up on the opportunity to acquire it because they didn't have the vision of what was possible in the future. And that is one of the things that underlying everything that you've spoken about today. Change happens every single day, and strategic leaders are built to roll with the change. They are built to lead the change, and they are built to help those around them understand why it's important to the individual employee, to the customer, through all the different levels of the organization. John, we've talked about a lot of things today. If you've piqued the interest and curiosity from the audience, how do they learn more?
Sure. So my new book's got a lot of this in there. It's called The Strategy Dialogues. And it is sort of the 10 most commonplace strategic things that every organization goes through. And they're recreated as a dialogue between a set of people having that strategy issue and a conversation around how do you get through that. And I've been very gratified at all the reviews. There's a lot of reviews on Amazon and elsewhere and out in the press. People have said, were you eavesdropping on our conversations? That's exactly. I said, I know. I've been in hundreds of these conversations. This is the way people figure out strategy. So I've got the dial. That's why it's called The Strategy Dialogues in there. And the book's currently the #1 seller in a number of strategy categories on Amazon. So I'm very grateful for that. So buy it wherever you can buy books. If you're interested, the audio version will be out soon. And then my website is johnhillen.com, where you can see more things I've done in there and around leadership and strategy and the connection between the two.
Fantastic. For the audience members, a link to the book on Amazon will be in the show notes, and to John's website, so that it's easy enough for you to just click and learn more. In the conversation today, we have started at the very beginning of what is strategic thinking, what is strategy, and the main underlying point: strategy is a game plan and a blueprint. It is supported by goals, missions, visions, and values, but it is actually the what and the how of the change that we're going to make. And it's important in that strategic mindset that we are optimistic as leaders, that we are future looking, that we are planning for the systems and the type of outcomes that are going to drive change, because change is part of everything that we do in every part of our business. While it is really easy for us as leaders to get stuck in responding to the problems and the tactics and the things that rise up each day, it's important that we also remember to set aside time to think, that we coach and develop others, because ultimately my goal is to be sitting on a beach letting somebody else do the things that I do every day. So it's important to develop others. And it's really imperative that we remember to get out of the office, to meet people, build relationships. And even if that means networking and understanding our client, our competition, because they love to share the gems about their problems, and we can always learn better from others vicariously. And if we don't have to experience the pain, why should we? John, thank you for a fantastic conversation. And audience members, you know my rules. Don't get left behind. Join me next time.
That's it for today's episode of Disrupt and Innovate. Head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show.